No matter what anybody says, they always have to
I had to delay my entrance because I saw McQuethy was still in the hallway, so I would have been here on time, of course, if it hadn't.
The only reason he's here is because I went and got him.
What do you think you're going to get for that service? You provided the nation.
For a bow tie for Christmas. Standard issue.
I have some frayed ones I can pass on to you. First, I'd like to begin the briefing by welcoming some guests. The first is Dr. Abdul Aram Al-Shaya, the first Secretary and Deputy Director for Public Information of the Royal Saudi Arabian Embassy here in Washington. As you know, the Saudi Embassy has helped a number of you get into the kingdom following the Khobar Towers bombing in June and since then. Second, Catherine Mary McKenzie is here. She is serving as a liaison officer for the Constitutional Assembly of the South African Parliament. She's visiting the U.S. under the auspices of the United States Information Agency International Visitor Program. And finally, we have 6 interns from the Atlantic Council, which is described as a think tank. With that, I'll take your questions.
Ken, could you respond to the LA Times article which says that there has been advanced stages of planning going on in terms of military strikes against Iran, given if a connection is made to the Khobar Towers bombing?
Well, on that, just let me say that the director of the FBI, Mr. Free, and his team are still analyzing and evaluating the information they have assembled on their own and the information that they've received from Saudi Arabia. That analysis is not complete, and until we I think it's premature to comment beyond that until the information is complete, until their analysis is complete.
I'll do a follow-up on that.
Sure.
Without putting words in his mouth, there seems to have been a clear implication by the Secretary on at least several occasions that if another country was found to be behind the bombing, that the United States would take action and or retaliate. Is that still a viable, operable situation?
I don't want to fuel any war fever that seems to be growing in the press right now. The President has spoken about the response we'll take, and the Secretary has spoken about the response we'll take. Nothing has changed about that. What I think you should keep in mind is that the FBI is evaluating information. It has not completed that evaluation, and it's premature to talk about future action until that analysis is complete.
You wouldn't deny, Ken, that plans, contingency plans for potential strike against Iran are out there, just like your contingency plans for other operations.
As you know, we don't talk about contingency plans. We don't talk about military plans, and I'm not going to start today.
The Secretary has said in the past that the U.S. has no evidence linking Iran. Is that no longer operative? Is there now evidence linking Iran?
As I said, the FBI has not completed its investigation, and I think it's premature to talk about evidence until the FBI has decided what it has and what it doesn't have. That's what's going on now.
The Secretary has talked about it in the past, using Iran's name specifically and talking about, in general ways, whether there is evidence linking it.
Until the FBI has completed its investigation, it is premature to talk about the outcome of that investigation.
Any idea how long that investigation is going to take?
I
at this
don't.
point?
You should direct that question to the FBI, and I wish you would.
And what is the latest assessment by the U.S. Intelligence people who are helping Louis Freeh on the cooperation from Saudi Arabia? Is Saudi Arabia giving all it can do?
I think it's appropriate for the FBI to comment on its cooperation with Saudi Arabia.
Would it be correct to say that a military response has not been ruled out and is on the table if a link is established?
It would be correct to say that I'm not going to address the idea of a military response in any way, shape, or form today.
Ken, do you have any idea when this, can you give us a ballpark on when this investigation will be completed, when this analysis will be completed, and when we might be receiving a report?
I think that's a restatement of the question I just referred to the FBI earlier, so showing you that I can remember...
Anybody to ask you when this thing might be completed?
Showing you that I can remember earlier answers, please ask the FBI.
Just ask the question.
What commitment did
You're not
the
listening.
Saudis give us in terms of having access to the people they're holding?
Again, we are not running this investigation. The FBI is running this investigation, and I think you should direct those questions to the FBI.
Perhaps we should turn to another issue you don't want that you do not want to comment on, and that is the Air Force General Records re-investigation of the General Downing report and his recommendations not to punish General Schweier. Now, it would come as a real surprise to me if you had anything to say on that, but I'll go ahead and ask you.
Well, that investigation is not complete, as Deputy Secretary White said earlier today, and until it is complete, I don't think I should comment on it. The Air Force is continuing its review of General Records' report, and when they complete that review and decide that the report is in its final form, they will then apprise the Secretary of Defense of what they found and what they decided to do based on their report. I would like to stress that the report that General Downing wrote on the Khobar Towers incident sparked a variety of responses, obviously, and one response was that before he even read the report, Secretary Perry asked the Air Force to review the report and to consider any action, whether any action is necessary in response to the report. In his directive, he said to decide whether any action is necessary regarding how the Air Force organizes, trains, and equips to support forces deployed to a unified command. And he pointed out that he had made no determination at that stage because he hadn't read the report. The Downing report recommended 28 or 26 actions in terms of improving force protection. And the Defense Department, when it received the Downing report, analyzed those 26 proposals and broke them down into 78 separate actions. These are all actions designed to improve force protection. As of now, we've completed action on 60 of those 78 separate activities. Another 13 are expected to be completed by the end of January, a month and a half from now. And the 5 other actions involve procurement or technology that will take longer to put into effect than January, so it'll be a longer-term project. But basically, we've made a lot of progress on putting these force protection measures into place. As you recall, one of the recommendations was that we try to put our forces in more secure locations, and we did that by moving the Air Force from Dhahran to the Prince Sultan Air Base at Al-Kharj, And we also consolidated a lot of our personnel in Escon village outside of Riyadh. It also recommended to set up a single focal point for force protection measures in the Department of Defense. The chairman has taken that on and has set up a special office within the J3, or the operations branch of the Joint Staff, and that's been up and running since October. It has 4 divisions, which is their current operations, plans and policies, requirements and programs, training, doctrine, and assessments. And that's to, as I say, pull together everything affecting our military forces around the world and improve force protection in every way we can.
Is
Yes.
there anything we can ask you today that you would comment on today?
Why don't you try?
How about Aberdeen? Any upgrade and update in the figures there?
Yeah, I can give you the
More on the Air Force review.
yeah, sure.
Realizing that the Air Force review is not complete, when it is, would this be the final word on the punishment, if any, to any Air Force general?
The Secretary's letter to the Air Force asked the Air Force to advise him as appropriate on the results of the review. So I assume when the report is complete, the Secretary will be briefed on the findings of the report. In theory, the Secretary could make his own determination about the report. I can't forecast what the Secretary will do because he hasn't seen the report yet and hasn't even been briefed on it. So until the report's complete, it's premature.
But in theory, he could actually say yes or no to the
In
report?
theory, but I don't think I want to forecast that that's going to happen. In fact, I think that the Secretary assigned this to the Air Force expecting a thorough investigation, and that's what and a thorough report, and that's what the Air Force is attempting to present. So, yes, Brian.
Can you give us an update on
You're
what
going to
we're
go back to
doing?
my question? Or are you
Oh,
changing?
Oh, your
sorry.
question on Aberdeen, on the figures. Well, just let me give you let me tell you where we stand on the calls. The breakdown of the hotline calls as of yesterday, 6,199 total, but it's important to make a distinction as to the types of calls. Of those, nearly 19% were from the media, and nearly 19% were from the general public expressing their points of view. 7.3% are classified as crank calls. 22.5% are classified as other, which I guess is a more favorable category than crank. And nearly 14%, or 850 calls, 850 calls warrant further investigation. So of the total calls we're getting, less than 14% of the calls turn up a need for further investigation, but 850 is still a large number. And remember, this is now a nationwide hotline. People aren't calling in just about Aberdeen. They can call in about charges of sexual harassment or reports of sexual harassment anywhere in the Army.
Going back to the Spanish-American War or World War II? Or...
Ivan, I didn't see you in that war.
So
Yes.
does that mean there will be investigators on every single call? The IG will set up an investigation on
The
every-
IG will figure out some way to investigate the circumstances behind these 850 calls. That's what they're in the process of doing
Is
now.
involved in those
The CID
individual
is involved
cases
in those,
also?
yes.
Do you have any
Beyond-
breakdown of how many are at Aberdeen and how many are elsewhere?
I'm afraid I don't have that, but we can get that for you.
Beyond the hotline, is there anything that advances its story about sexual harassment at Aberdeen or elsewhere in the military?
No, the Army's continuing to look at it aggressively. The numbers change from day to day. There was a report today in the Times that had some of the latest numbers that came out of the congressional visit there yesterday. Those numbers are correct. But the hotline is designed to attract calls from people who have charges to report. And it is it is serving that purpose. The calls are coming in, and we're investigating those calls as quickly as possible. Brian?
New subject?
Sure.
Couple things. Can you update us on what we're doing in Central Africa? And also, December 20th is next week, the date at which I-4 should be pulling out of Boston. Can you update us on that?
Central Africa. Tomorrow, the Canadians will host a meeting of the steering group to look at the situation in Central Africa and to decide whether a multinational force is necessary to carry out a humanitarian mission. We will obviously key our action to that decision. We have been, in the meantime, however, drawing down our force in Central Africa. From a peak of approximately 450 people in Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda, we're down to about probably 220 right now, 220, 240, somewhere in that range. We are continuing with the reconnaissance flights. The P-3 and the AC-130 flew today. But if the international community decides that multinational force won't be necessary, then we will close down that operation, or at least shrink it down to a very small, continuing sort of group that could expand quickly if necessary. But we would probably close it down to half a dozen people or less pretty quickly.
Where are most of your 220 now?
Most of them are in Entebbe.
Is the steering group at the UN again?
I think it is, but I'm afraid we'll get you it's at the UN tomorrow. Yeah.
In Bosnia?
Bosnia, you're absolutely right. The I-4 mission ends on December 20th, a week from tomorrow. The I-4 has done a fabulous job, and Secretary Perry will be in Bad Kreuznach on Monday to honor the 1st Armored Division, which was the spine of the U.S. Participation in the I-4. There are now slightly more than 9,000 soldiers in Bosnia. That will be down to about 8,500 on December 20th. And that's really the day that the stabilization force will be, the name of the force will change. And the basic mission of maintaining security, a safe and secure environment in Bosnia will continue. But the operations will be somewhat more modest. There'll be smaller base camps. There'll be a smaller number of base camps, about half the number of base camps in the American sector, for instance. Charlie?
These 8,500 are virtually all new troops. The others are all...
Well, they're the troops that have come in.
Folks are all out.
Yeah, the I-4, the 1st Armored Division, as I announced last week, is all gone, and they're going back to Germany. They did a fabulous job, and now they're being replaced by the 1st Infantry Division, and they're pretty much they're there. But as I say, the drawdown is continuing until we get down to 8,500.
How many support troops will be in? How many support troops will be in other countries? Hungary, nearby Hungary, Croatia.
I think the number is about 3,000, but I'll get that for you. I don't have it for the first day in weeks. I don't have it in my book, but it's about 3,000, I think. Under the stabilization force formula, there'll be, I believe, about 3,000 in Hungary.
Does that count Italy, or is that?
I'll get that for you. Rick Scott will get that for you. Yeah, Brian.
Just to follow up on Africa, considering that we are drawing down the number of forces there, does that lead one to believe that there probably won't be an international mission there? I mean, wouldn't it make sense to wait until the meeting tomorrow before you do that?
The momentum seems to be moving away from an international mission there. There's been massive repatriation of refugees, and these refugees seem to be in relatively good health. And there still are vast movements of people in eastern Zaire, but now the most dramatic movements seem to be largely westward into Zaire rather than eastward into Rwanda. Not only have about 600,000 people gone into Rwanda, but there have been fairly large movements into Burundi, Tanzania, and some into Uganda as well. Probably over 150,000 have moved into those countries. So, as I say, we were poised to deal with a humanitarian crisis that could have developed very quickly and developed in monumental and horrendous proportions, but fortunately that didn't happen. Yes?
Update on the CIA modeling, supposed to be released Sunday, December 15th.
We're going to have a press conference here on Sunday at noon, and we hope you'll get here in time to release the CIA model. No, it's a joke. I don't know where we stand on the CIA model, to tell you the truth. I'll check into that. But
The gentleman who's sitting over here, does he have a clue? Bernie?
Bernie, do you know when that will be?
Check on Scott's able that. I will pick it up from him, but I have no information right now.
Another Gulf War illness
Sure.
question. This has to do with a story which appeared in the Seattle newspaper saying that a scientist has found a mycoplasm in the blood of half of the Gulf War veterans he has sampled, and it appears that it is a man-made genetic structure to it. Do you have a comment on that?
You're referring to research that's been done by Professor Nicholson, and I guess some of it's been done with his wife as well. A government task force, the Persian Gulf Veterans Research Working Group, met with Dr. Nicholson in August of 1995 to discuss his findings with him.
Wait a minute, these findings he had back in August of '95.
Yes, these findings actually are not new findings. They've been around for some time, and he's been working on this project for some time, and we have, as I said, met with him in '95, and actually we met with him before that as well, because he was invited in 1993. I'm sorry, I'm not exactly certain of this date. He was invited before 1995 to submit a proposal for research which the government would fund. And a formal call for such a research proposal was issued in May of 1993. And he has not yet proposed a research project that could be funded by the government. He has not responded to that proposal yet. So we have not been able to fund a study by him to follow up on his results. We have, however, launched our own study of mycoplasma infections in Gulf War veterans, and that study started in October of 1995, and it's scheduled to be completed by the end of August 1997. So that study is ongoing.
Where is that being done?
It's being done at Walter Reed, and it involves 200 Gulf veterans showing symptoms of Gulf War illness and 200 healthy Gulf veterans as the control group, basically. And as I say, that study's ongoing, so I think it would be premature to talk about its results until it's completed. But this is something we are looking at. Other scientists in the government have talked to Dr. Nicholson, including scientists from the Centers for Disease Control. And they offered to collaborate with him in August of 1993. But that didn't take place. He said the CDC said that they were willing to cooperate, but to date he's declined the offer.
I detect from the careful way that you're sort of laying out his lack of proposing, asking for government money or cooperating, that that maybe Nicholson is regarded as his research may be somewhat suspect?
I don't want to say that at all. I want to say that we have met with Dr. Nicholson. We are interested enough in his research to fund our own study on mycoplasmal infections in Gulf War veterans. We have asked him to submit proposals for studies. So far, that hasn't happened. I'm not to say that it wouldn't happen, but it hasn't happened yet. We have, I believe, reached out to Dr. Nicholson and expressed an interest to work with him on these results. So it is something we're looking at. I might just make another point here, which is that there's been a lot of focus on the possibility of exposure to chemicals during or after the Gulf War recently. This, of course, is a story about possible bacterial infection. And I think what it shows is that there are a lot of places to look in trying to unravel the Gulf War mystery. We now have about 80 studies either underway, completed, or on the drawing boards that look at a wide variety of possible toxins or possible reasons why people became ill during the Gulf War. And many of them some do look at low-level chemical exposure. Others look at bacterial toxins and other toxins. Some look at medicines that were given to Gulf War participants, and others look at the impact from oil well fires. So there's a wide variety of studies going on now, all part of our effort to unravel what happened to veterans there.
Some of these government studies, some of them not.
Yeah, well, these are all studies that have been funded by the government, not all by the Defense Department, some by the Department of Veterans Affairs, some by the CDC, some by other parts of HHS. And I can't give you a breakdown as to which studies have been initiated by department.
Some of them are being done by universities, say, rather
Yeah,
than
yeah, they're not all being done by government researchers. A lot of them are contract studies, and as we announced earlier this week, we've put out a proposal for more studies on the impact of possible low-level exposure to chemicals, and we assume that universities will come in, nothing precluding a private company coming in, but we assume it'll be some university will come in and propose a study, and are subject to a peer review proceeding and decide which are the best proposals. Charlie?
You've made clear that there are no final conclusions here, but based on these studies in August of '95, are there any preliminary conclusions on your part that these findings might be legitimate, that his findings might be legitimate?
Whose findings?
The Professor Nicholson's, Dr. Nicholson's.
I can't comment on that. I mean, this study is ongoing. It still has more than 6 months to go. And at the appropriate time, we'll get somebody in here if you'd like. We could get somebody probably to come in and give you a review of all the studies we've had so far and the studies underway and how we've structured these studies. In all the brouhaha over the Gulf War illness, the clinical care procedures that we've set up and the research procedures have gotten basic approval from a variety of groups, including the National Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine. I mean, this is looking at the clinical side, the care of veterans, or the care by the Pentagon of people who fought in the war, and also the research side, the scientific research side. But it has not produced the answers that people want. We continue to look.
I mean, to the great unwashed, it would seem that this would be the best concrete thread of finding some concrete evidence that these people suffer from the same thing.
Well, it's hard to know. My understanding is that Dr. Nicholson's results are based on his examination of 73 Persian Gulf veterans who have come to him. Now, he is working in an area where we're also working, so we acknowledge that this is an important area. But I can't comment on his results right now, in part because we haven't been able to set up the scientific verification of those results that we would like to. Yes, Tammy.
Understanding that the study isn't yet completed, in the past, department officials have said there's no evidence, the department has no evidence to suggest that troops might have been exposed to biological agents. In light of the fact that the department is going to the effort of studying this issue, does that revise that statement?
Secretary Perry said last week that we have no evidence that soldiers were exposed to biological agents during the war or after the war, but we continue to look at all the evidence. We don't believe that Iraq used biological agents during the war, and we don't believe that our soldiers or other soldiers were exposed. But our mind is open, and I think the lesson of Camisea is that we have to leave our mind open. We have to keep working to look for every explanation of what's afflicting people who don't yet know why they're ill after the war. Yes?
How much money has been spent on all these studies and programs?
I'm afraid I don't have a global figure. Do you, Bernie, have a global figure for research?
This year, we're talking about $27 million, but I don't have last year's.
Is that considered a low number, or is that considered a high number in the relative?
Well, the number was increased, actually, as part of Dr. White's efforts to strengthen our whole effort to find out what happened in the Gulf, why people are suffering the illnesses they are, and that was one of the reasons that Dr. Rosker was appointed and given a much bigger staff. At the same time, we also boosted our research efforts. And, as I said last week, when we learned in the spring of this year that there had been the possibility of exposure to chemicals after Camisea, we began to pour more money into the impact of possible low-level chemical exposure. So that's one of the reasons it's been increased.
The Seattle story suggests that there are at least some reports that Kuwaiti civilians are suffering from a variety of ailments similar to Gulf War illness. Are we talking to the Kuwaiti authorities about that and about the possibility that this is some organism that is naturally occurring in that part of the world?
We have sent teams over to Kuwait to meet with their medical officials and to review their records. The Army Surgeon General has been over there, for instance, and we right now don't have any evidence that there is a on the military side. I don't know about civilians. We talk primarily on the military side. The Kuwaiti Minister of Health did not raise concerns about the widespread outbreak of illnesses after the war or any concerns about symptoms similar to those that some of our veterans are experiencing. Now, that was in May of 1996 that we went over and talked to the Kuwaiti Minister of Health.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You didn't get any breaking news there on that piece of paper.
Or possibly even other services. Because what we found, what the Army has found, is that people are calling in with reports from other services, not just the Army. The Army hotline is the one that's in the news, so if people have something to report, they call in. If it deals with another service, then the Army will refer it to one of the 3 other services.
Yeah, the reason I was confused is that I thought the Army yesterday said it was 50 for Aberdeen, but that's strictly for raid work.
You'll have to check with the Army on that.